Please don't buy Resident Evil 2. Now, why do I say that? Why do I say please don't buy Resident Evil 2? Most of you have already bought the game, no doubt. You more than likely have already pre-ordered the game. But the reason why I say please don't buy Resident Evil 2 is simply due to the fact that Capcom didn't keep their word. A few years ago, Capcom said that they were going to remake Resident Evil 2. And yet here we are just a couple of months away from the launch of Resident Evil 2, and I'm still waiting for that remake. Instead, what we got is an all-new addition to the Resident Evil franchise. A game that was built from the ground up with the foundation of Resident Evil 2 in mind. But a full-blown remake that we were once promised from Capcom? That's not in the cards. That's out the window, folks. And why that's a problem, huge problem, is because they, number one, didn't keep their word, and number two, you go and you look into what's going on here with Resident Evil 2, and they've changed so much. You know, all of the locations have been altered. The way the characters meet each other have been transformed. I mean, it's, again, an entirely new experience. And perhaps that's not necessarily a bad thing. Most of you are going to sit there and say, well, we don't want to play the same game that we played, many years ago. And I agree with that to some extent. But you have to find the right balance. And I think ultimately that is where the game is going to struggle, because it didn't find that balance. For example, take a look at Shinji Mikami's Resident Evil remake. He stayed true to the source material, but at the same time, added in new stuff that made sense to spice up the formula a tad bit. New enemies, new locations, so on and so forth. But he didn't deviate too much from the original game. And that is, in my opinion anyway, how you remake a game. You have to find that balance, man. And seemingly, based off of what I've seen here with Resident Evil 2, so much has changed that I'm not getting those old school Resident Evil 2 vibes. In fact, this feels more like Resident Evil 7. And that's unfortunate. And Capcom hasn't done all that much to cater to the old school fans. I mean, yeah, sure, we have the classic soundtrack, but that's essentially behind a paywall as you have to pre-order the game. And not only that, we have the classic costumes for Leon and Claire. But if we specifically look at the Claire costume, well, they're missing some details. But other than the classic soundtrack, which I don't think I will turn on because it just doesn't really fit this game, and the classic costumes, while they're nice, again, they are missing some details, there's not all that much here to kind of appease to the old school classic fans. And that is so unfortunate. What should have happened in order to really please the old school classic fans is they should have had a classic option, in terms of playing this game with the fixed camera angles and the tank controls. Now, I know Capcom has said that they kind of toyed and tinkered around with that idea as they were developing Resident Evil 2 here. But, I just don't know if I believe that, to be frank. I think they just said that to kind of like, oh yeah, well, they tried, but couldn't get it done. Just didn't really fit with what they were doing here. I really think it's a missed opportunity, to be honest with you, and I think ultimately it is going to hurt this game to not have that option in there. And another weird thing, another oddball decision from Capcom this time around is there is no demo, at least seemingly, for Resident Evil 2. And why that's a weird decision is because, well, every other Resident Evil game has essentially had a demo. And for this one not to have a demo could very well mean that Capcom isn't nearly as confident in this as they would like to be. Or they're kind of scared to put out this thing early, give people a taste of what Resident Evil 2 is all about, because maybe it isn't all that great, and if the conversation starts popping up a little early before the game's launch about, oh, it's not that great, it's not where it needs to be, Capcom should delay it, blah, 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 and I'm not saying that would be the general consensus, but if that did happen, well, that could potentially hinder sales, and Capcom, they don't want that. And last but not least, bro, let me be honest with you guys, this game looks boring. I'm just being frank with you. And that was one of the biggest problems that I personally had with Resident Evil 7. And again, I'm getting a lot of Resident Evil 7 vibes from Resident Evil 2 here. In fact, the UI here in Resident Evil 2 was ripped straight out of Resident Evil 7. That's another missed opportunity. They really should have gone back to the original game, the classic UI, and revamped it, modernized it, for this game. But they didn't want to do that. Because again, this is an all-new edition of Resident Evil 2. It's not a remake. And I think a lot of people are confused by that. A lot of people just kind of seem to think, oh yeah, this is a remake. It's not a remake. It's not a remake. And look, I could go on and on and on, but I don't want to sound like a negative Nancy. I don't. I really don't, folks. Because I'm still looking forward to this somewhat. I'm just going in, and I'm going to rent the game. There's no way that I'm spending $60 on this game because Capcom didn't give me a reason to. And I think a lot of you should kind of be a little bit more aware about what this game is and what they're trying to do here. Because again, I think a lot of people are going in with the mindset like, oh yeah, they've remade Resident Evil 2, when in reality, they have not remade Resident Evil 2. This doesn't stay all that close to the source material. They've remixed things. They've, gone back in and said, hey, look, we're going to do this a little bit differently this time around, which is fine. It's fine, but you have to have that balance. And one of the things that Shinji Mikami did so incredibly well, as I mentioned previously, is he went back into, Resident Evil, the original game, and remade it, and he did a remake that made sense, and it worked so unbelievably well. And one of the reasons why it worked so unbelievably well, because it found the right balance. And unfortunately, based off of what I've seen anyway here with Resident Evil 2, it just really doesn't seem to have an identity. It seems to have an identity crisis. It wants to kind of be this old school, cool, new school type fucking thing, but at the same time, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, it's not a remake. That's what Capcom has been saying, and clearly that is evident on display as we see footage of Resident Evil 2.